Stick around to the end of the podcast and you'll hear a contribution from Andrew Cartmel, the script editor of The Greatest Show in the Galaxy, who gave his time for free to offer enlightenment and insight. So it behoves me to point out that at the time of recording, the seventh of Andrew's vinyl detective novels was about to be released by Titan. If you're in the UK, well, it'll be out by the time that you hear this, published on the 19th of March. In the US, April the 9th. There are 7 of these vinyl detective novels, and Andrew is rightly proud of them, so if you enjoy his contribution, perhaps head to your local stockist and avail yourselves of his work. Well, hello there, hoping to score 3 9s in a row from you families listening at home, even if you're just a family of one. It's me, Toby Haydock, with Happy Times and Places, the positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast in which I try and guess my guests' favourite things about their chosen episode of the show.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to you, Toby. I'm Connor Adkins, and I'm typically a Doctor Who artist who happens to draw an awful lot of Doctor Who in realistic format. But today, I'm here to challenge you to see if you can guess my favourite parts from the Doctor Who story, The Greatest Show in the Galaxy. Let's see what you got.
Well, welcome back, folks. I'm sure you'd like to know it's the start of another podcast show. I'm pretty sure I did something similar in the opening titles of last week's, but it's not every Doctor Who story that begins with a rap from a ringmaster. And so I'm infected. I mean, you should be grateful, because the other earworm I've had today before reacquainting myself with The Greatest Show in the Galaxy, which is a very enjoyable slice of Doctor Who, and a slice of Doctor Who I enjoyed even back in the day when I was being a rebellious teenager and hating Doctor Who because it wasn't as good as it used to be, and JNT must go now, and I want proper gritty stories like Doctor Who in them olden days. And it's funny how I never thought I could like the McCoy era as much as the golden days of yore, which I'd started to collect by then and largely been disappointed by because they weren't the Target books. Did I go through a period where I just didn't like all of Doctor Who? What? No, it's not that I didn't. I loved Doctor Who, but there was always an element of it that set my teeth on edge, or that I was worried about, and yet I spent all my time thinking about it and doing it. But even within that, I loved The Greatest Show in the Galaxy, or certainly the first 3 episodes. We will look to that next time, I'm sure. Let's enjoy the present rather than fretting about the future or looking back to the past, which is what a younger me could definitely have done. But I've now got that rap. Is it a rap? It's not quite a rap, is it? But it's got the hasn't it? The beginning. That's a joke I do here at Haydock Towers, by the way. Whenever Shirley talks about rapping a present, I do the old and that's not even rapping, is it? That's scratching records. But that's what I mean by rap. I mean they're largely that body popping, rapping. They're all the same thing. They're all what those behatted, becapped people do. But anyway, I'm leading on to say, yes, I have that ringmaster rap in my head. But prior to coming into recording this session of Happy Times and Places, I have had American Pie by Don McLean going round in my head. I don't know why. I was singing it when I was making our supper. I was doing a curry for supper. And I don't know why that had entered my head. But anyway, I then got very annoyed by the song because there's a line that goes, bad news on the doorstep. I couldn't take one more step. And you go, you've just rhymed step with step. That's terrible. You could rhyme any other word with step. You don't rhyme a word with the same word. I know doorstep and step aren't, strictly speaking, the same word, but they're the same rhyme. It's your rhyme. No, they are the same word. Doorstep. If you take the door off doorstep, you're rhyming step and step. You're rhyming step with step. Don't rhyme Johnny Depp with step. Rhyme that kind of mushroom, a sep with step. But rhyme I'm full of pep with Step. I mean, the options are, because Johnny Depp hadn't been invented when American Pie was written. But nonetheless, don't rhyme Step with Step, especially if you're a song that goes on to be world famous, enduring, and in some cases rather revered and very much coursing through our popular culture. When you rhyme Step with Step. Other songs annoy me. I mean, I've never forgiven the Spice Girls, well, for a number of things, but they have a song where they say, "You're throwing far too much emotions at me." No, would it kill you to say too many emotions or far too much emotion? But you can't have too much emotions. Bloomin' Spice Girls. But anyway, so my earworm today, up until just before I started recording, I was going, bad news on the doorstep, I couldn't take one more step. But then as soon as I saw Rico Ross, I'm much more into the, well, welcome, folks. I'm sure you'd like to know. I'm doing a musical episode of Happy Times and Places. Everyone does a musical episode these days. I'll do a live episode. Somebody's actually asked that in the AMA. Could I do a live episode? Do you know what I'm really trying to build up to do? I have a Twitch channel for Excess Malarkey. I'd like to do a kind of show, and more as I see television production slowing down, me getting ancient and therefore probably not desired by any of the mainstream channels anyway, and seeing the great work that friends of mine do. I've got comedy stuff I'd like to do. I've got sort of archive TV stuff I'd like to do. I'd love to do a sort of live show on a Twitch channel, but I'd need to run up at it, and I haven't had a chance because I have been swim against the tide so far in 2024. But the intent is there. But that's where I could do a sort of live commentary, could I? And I could convene guests and things like that. But anyway, I say that out loud because sometimes that makes things happen, doesn't it? If you sort of put it out there rather than just have it festering in my head like a rap from an 80s Doctor Who show. Anyway, listen up, folks. It's time for episode 3 of The Greatest Show in the Galaxy that I'm enjoying very much with Connor J Adkins, and that also I'm anticipating getting some insight into from Andrew Cartmel. Now, normally, this is against my way of doing things. I wouldn't invoke this because it's not done yet. He's agreed to do it, but it's not in the can. I go, well, if I say it out loud, that means something will happen, and it won't happen. But I'm going to try and be confident. I go, no, I'm saying it. And all Andrew said is, yeah, let's do it, but let me know. But I need to record these and find out what my favourite things are and what Connor's favourite things are before going to Andrew and asking him about what his favourite things are, and then we can compare and contrast. But hopefully, by the time that you get this, I will have interviewed Andrew, and you will find him safe and sound, snugly ensconced into the post-commentary part of this episode of Happy Times and Places, because Andrew has said that he would always be happy to give insight into his episodes, which I think gives an extra dimension to these particular releases. So, but aside from that, Connor is a really interesting fellow, a very, very gifted artist, and has his own perspectives too, and is a very welcome guest under his own steam and in his own right. So let's see first what and then after the episode, what Connor J Adkins has to say about the third episode, episode 3 of The Greatest Show in the Galaxy. And I'm going to press play in 3, 2, 1. I always feel like it's going to be spontaneous, and I'm very sorry for anybody that watches along, although I would be interested in the percentages. I think very, very small number of people actually watch with the episodes, but I always press, select or whatever it is I press, and then I get that little circle that just goes, oh no, not going to quite start exactly when you want me to, Toby, because although everything is at the touch of a button, you touch your button and we will just give you a little bit of pushback, just to give you a brief indication that eventually the machines will take over and will make you. So that's the first sign of the sort of rebellion of the machines going, we're not doing exactly what you want, Is it the machines, though, or is it the internet? Is it the machines that are going to destroy us all, or will the internet... I think the internet might destroy us all. The internet has destroyed our ability to talk to each other, but let's not get bogged down in that. I think I talked, didn't I, about pressing the pause button on videotape, and that's in order to get that sort of paintboxy effect. That was one was very aware at the time that sort of smoke and that green glow and that eye, look at that is slightly askew, isn't it? It's not quite keyed in at the right angle. That is very much very 80s. It's very much a sort of paint box effect. That works slightly better. It depends on the camera angle, really, doesn't it? And the way that it can sort of be synthesized into the picture. But it doesn't look real. It looks like a painting because it's paint box, and it's obviously, CGI has got so much more advanced. But that was definitely, even though we were aware it wasn't great, one did know that this was a new effect and that this was something to sort of be embraced in a way because it was the next thing, and certainly better than CSO, which had become a bit of a grind, but was obviously a fledgling process and one that would need work on. But it's very reminiscent of those Chronicles of Narnia that were around that time as well. But now, obviously, I suspect to people born since, it looks very primitive. Whereas I remember when it was cutting edge, even though we weren't fooled by it, I think we did know as viewers that this was the next step in the evolution of television design. And that's very good as well, because you've got a I can see that clown breathing. Is he breathing? I was going to say they've replaced, when she pushes it over, they've replaced the actor with obviously something that can be pushed over, and maybe they have. But so I thought, well, so therefore lying on the floor it will be a mannequin or whatever. But I just did notice then for the first time ever that it was breathing. Now again, I think they're trying to hint that Mags might be a werewolf, but I'm not sure. I think it's subtly seeded in. I like the look of these crisps, because they look like quite, classy, unflavoured plain crisps. This is David Ashton, who I'd have loved to have chatted to because, David Ashford. There's David Ashton, who is Kendron in Timelash, and that's David Ashford, who plays the dad, who is very good in the Euston Quatermass in episode 3. He's the sort of young, hungry, hot-blooded minister who then takes over when Kevin Stone, as Prime Minister, has a heart attack, and he's horrible, and it's a really nice performance. And I did write to him, and I never got a reply back, and thought, maybe he's not interested, doesn't care or whatever. But then I spoke after David Ashford, who was a great comic collector, I believe, passed away. Somebody else got in touch and said, I interviewed him, and he was, he gave me some lovely stuff on Quatermass, and bless that person had shared the interview with me and has allowed me to quote from it in my forthcoming later volume of my series of books, so you won't see it for a while. But anyway, so I do have a contribution from David Ashford for my Quatermass, but I didn't get it directly as a sign of one being dependent on the kindness of strangers, but also, and Janet Hargreaves, who plays the mum, was actually quite a big name from Crossroads. I didn't realise this at the time. She was an actress I sort of thought I recognised, but wasn't sure. And I remember not recognising the name, but actually she has an important role in Crossroads, and indeed does a shooting, quite an intense shoots Ronald Allen, I think. Crossroads isn't my forte, but I believe she wasn't just somebody who was passing through Crossroads. She was somebody who played a very important role. But both David and Janet are sadly now no longer with us, but I think they do a lovely job as the suburban, as it turns out, gods. But I think they're an aspect of the story that kind of works because you have this weird, very recognizable, what I would call a sort of biscuit tin depiction of and the nuclear family, as it were, but who are also sort of symbols of the viewing public watching Doctor Who. Now, it has been said that this story is a metaphor for Doctor Who, which certainly hadn't occurred to me at the time. I knew WizKid was obvious as soon as WizKid said. I don't think I picked up on WizKid early on being a Doctor Who fan. It's odd. You sometimes don't recognise yourself when you stare in the mirror. Christopher Guard does this brilliantly, by the way. He's lovely. Oh, and he has got stubble. So I take that back from what I said about it being one of my attempted rationalising of my view of this story of being of sort of types and of caricatures, but not caricatures in the pejorative sense, but of larger than life character types who are not sort of gritty and down to earth. But actually, Chris Guard there does have the stubble of somebody that hasn't shaved and has been broken down, and yeah, maybe Chris Drury does as well. So my use of stubble as an indicator of gritty realism is perhaps, or the absence thereof was perhaps incorrect. But I like this. But Deadbeat is a very interesting character. It's another layer to the mystery, and what's he all about, and that's and I think Chris Drury does it very well. It's and that's sort of slightly sort of spaced out hippie vibe, all types with that. Though this character is much more of that sort of trope of the person that sees too much and loses his mind. Which was a sort of shorthand to show the power of something. It was so powerful, it made him mad, sort of thing. Whereas I think we'd have to be a bit more careful with that now, because the idea of somebody losing their mind and then regaining it, which then becomes a cure for their mental disturbance. I talked about this a lot with Planet of Spiders. I think you'd have to sort of have an eye on in this day and age where difference of mental faculties are treated in a slightly different way. But isn't it interesting that I never saw this person who wanted to look a particular way whilst wearing a bow tie and a shirt and thought they looked like Patrick Troughton when they did so, but actually looked like 16-year-old for Virgin, not looking remotely cool or even eccentric. And I didn't recognise myself within that, but I did recognise which I think I must have talked over last week. I love the way that they are here. I really buy Rico Ross's relationship with him and the way that the fractiousness between them. I buy the relationship between these people in it, and it does add a layer of realism to the abstract setting. But with WizKid, yes, when he said I didn't get to see the early days, but I know it's not as good as it used to be. I knew then that we were on the piss take of Doctor Who fans ground, but I don't think the visual gave me that. I think, WizKid, I think, probably a computer geek, and certainly the casting of Jan Samarco. I thought, well, he's an Adrian Mole type. I didn't think he's a Toby Haydock type, but he clearly was. I don't think I thought like that, but certainly, I would have. And again, in the same way that Twin Dilemma and Caves of Androzani look exactly the same to the not we, I suspect the difference between myself and how WizKid is presented in this story and how I presented myself may have been, poles apart as far as I was concerned, but the separation was a gossamer thin sliver of a Rizla paper. And I have to say, I think it's a reasonable. I've just listened to a Big Finish recently, which was a lovely story, in which purports to be, it's a space adventure, and it's about the relationship between one captain pursuing another, Pursuit of the Nightjar, it's called. But without a spoiler, there is an element of that plot that then looks like it is satirizing the worst successes of fandom, and it's very well done. But I also thought, this is such a lovely story. It doesn't need the sort of dig at fandom. But actually, it's a perfectly legitimate thing for Doctor Who to do, to shine a mirror on ourselves, and even those of us that think we unconditionally love the show have been very, very guilty of being rude about it, of unnecessary expectations, of taking the piss, whatever, and fandom, for all its great things and the friendships and the community, does have a dark side. I think we can all be arseholes as fans, and in fact some fans are arseholes more often than they're not. I'd like to hope that I am not, and that my arseholery is only temporary, or let out a little at a time. But that said, I nonetheless think it's if it is done if it is done with affection, I think it's a reasonable thing to do. If it is done as a consideration of what it is that grows up around the series, if it wants to be meta about it, I think it can be. I think actually that works better in a story like like this than it does in a sort of serious story where it might, as I say, it might seem like an unnecessary dig. That's not to criticize Pursuit of the Nightjar, because I thought it was an excellent thing. It just surprised me that it had that element. And looking back now, I go, no, but that was perfectly fine. But I remember when I was in the story, I was going, I'm preferring the stuff that doesn't care about the outside world of Doctor Who, because it's a story that exists in its own right, that is doing the things that it's doing so beautifully well. It doesn't need to sort of come out of it and say, well, we're going to comment on fandom now. Actually, the points that it makes were really interesting and very well done. But it was more the existence of that point within what was a touching and well-characterized narrative. Anyway, in this kind of story where you have these overblown characters that can sort of, in a way, only exist in the universe of this story. WizKid could not exist in Terror of the Autons or The Mind of Evil. But in this kind of president, or even in Remembrance of the Daleks, But that's why I think this era is quite brave, in which it goes, well, we're actually doing a different genre. He could exist in Carnival of Monsters, though, so it's not unique to this era. But I think this era embraces this kind of story perhaps more than any other. And also, I think the way that the Doctor Who production team was having to deal with fandom, I think it's not an. I don't think it's uncalled for them to go, well, we're going to create this annoying person who hasn't even seen the stuff that he thinks is better than the stuff that you can see. Because I have to say, I was that guy. I thought Greatest Show in the Galaxy, all of the McCoy, all of the John Nathan Turner stories, I was caught up in all that brouhaha, were nothing like as good as those black and white classics like the Space Museum. The Web Planet, which was riding high at that time as a story that was, I think I'd probably actually got Web Planet by now, but do you know what I mean? The ones that I hadn't seen were, beyond reproach. This is why I'm always interested in how we treat the past and nostalgia and who controls the present controls the past, who controls the past controls the future, all of that. We can kid ourselves of all sorts, and I knew I was being dishonest. He enters very well. He plays the part perfectly. He is not unlike some people I know. I don't know if there are a couple of people I know who have vocal patterns and indeed tonality and pitch not unlike the way that WizKid enunciates. And this is sort of quite sick. Jessica Martin is doing all the heavy lifting. T.P. McKenna can't do anything. You know, he's deliberately being an arsehole about it. So he's got to be sort of dismissive of it, like with it, and I think that just goes to show delivery is very, very funny. And it is, again, this is grim if you are inclined to let it be. If the story hasn't won you over and this tone and the broad strokes of the characterization are not to your taste, I can understand why you might go, but this is just stupid. I mean, I have to say, I love the wheezing, groaning sound, but they really hated this story, and I thought they were unfair on it because I think they took it very much on surface value, and I think there's a lot more going on, and I think it's aware. It's, you know, as I say, it's largesse where it is in terms of, you know, the bigness of the characters is deliberate. It's a tonal choice to say we are in this slightly abstracted universe, but then that means we can sort of go big on the weirdness with the family, with the nature of the threat, and I think it exists very much on its own terms, and if you meet it, as I was very happy to, there's really much to enjoy. But Sophie does this really well. That kind of, she knows that, and remember, she's just a kid, Ace. She's trying to be brave. He's lovely as well. You know, I think that's really well done. I think Sophie does that brilliantly. I think that, you know, Ace trying to be brave, knowing that she's saying goodbye to somebody who she knows she's not seeing again. That's the sort of stuff that in a drama that kids are watching is, you know, it's an emotional tug. It's very, very well done. And Morgana's story is good. She's you know useful here as the conscience of the circus, if you like, and she has this tug of loyalty, which actually, as we'll see in next episode, ends up going nowhere. But she's useful. She's a useful character in helping us negotiate the different factions and the past and present of the psychic circus. Love this. That slap is pretty horrible. The fact that Bellboy is scared, but being quite brave, but in his sort of broken and actually slightly impotent way, and the only thing he can do is this rather grotesque thing, which is get the clowns to kill him. I think this is horrifying, brilliantly directed, that again it's happening in the background. And that's horrible because you see what they're doing, and it's a suicide, but it's death by cop, but it's death by clown. But then you do that thing where you see the hands going around the throat, but in the background, because Waring is not afraid to go on. I don't have to stare directly at it to make it a thing. It's not like the Sontaran unmasking in long shot that Peter Moffat does. It's actually saying I'm making it more effective by only giving you a glimpse and then favouring at the front your prize asset, which is the sort of perverse enjoyment that Ian Reddington's clown gets out of the thing that we're being horrified by, the self-destruction, the suicide of a person, of a broken, sympathetic character who's lost everything, a creative optimist. That's the sad thing about the destruction of the circus, is that we get this little window, and actually part of that is now reawakening with the Tomification, if you like, of Deadbeat, but that comes having now just lost, Bellboy, and we've had these hints to the past about when the circus was, at its best, but these were optimistic, peace-loving hippies who were creative and wanted to. Now, whatever we think about the flaws within that idealism, and actually the fact that some hippies I've met have preached peace and love and been pretty grim in terms of the way that they treat each other and other people. Let's get away from that. For the purposes of this story, these are benign, creative, optimistic people full of hope. This is the 60s dream, and the destruction of it. Again, however fragile those foundations might have turned out to be in terms of history and stuff, in terms of within this story and what they're trying to represent, anybody remotely interesting is mad is also a very nice line, and could be could be an anthem for Doctor Who. And this is great. I like the way that they're, suddenly being a bit scary and terrifying. That's my favourite of the clowns, by the way. I like that design. But yeah, the death of Bellboy is that kind of that is symbolic of the destruction of hope, of optimism, of malignancy that always creeps in, despite the best intentions and hopes of creative and peace-loving people. The reality, if you like, if you want to be cruel about it, that creeps into idealism. And the death, that's what makes the death of Bellboy even sort of more appalling, is that it's more than the death of one man. It's a death. He wills for his own death because his idealism, his soul, his creativity, his identity have been crushed. And so that's really, really sad. And it's beautifully done by Christopher Guard. It's beautifully done the way it's shot. But then the fact that quite alarming thing, and I think, suicides in Doctor Who are unusual. I think, Max Style in Image of the Fendal, and that is pretty grim. But Style is at least a baddie. I mean, I'm not, as I say, I'm not saying, but it's for a program where death is a common currency, self-inflicted death still seems a step quite far. And again, and it's different to self-sacrifice, Pex or something like that, which sort of achieves a greater good. Nothing is achieved by Bellboy's death. It is sort of pointless. I suppose it buys the Doctor and Ace a little time, but that's kind of it. So it's horrible, and it's empty, and it's sad. And then you cut to this clown going, yeah, but I love this, which kind of goes, oh man, he's not just a scary clown, he's a psychopath. I think it's wonderful. Now, here is the least surprising twist in the history of Doctor Who. And as I say, we knew this was coming. And I'm not wild about this. Partially that cut as well is a sort of, it's not quite a cut in camera, but the angle's not enough of a change for it not to look like we know that she's gone away and that, had a bit of makeup done. So it's a slight in camera. But I think I would have preferred a hairy werewolf to a green-faced snivelly werewolf. That's another quite sort of theatrical set of movements there. It's a shame. I'm not wild about that cliffhanger. I can see what they were aiming for, and a sort of punk werewolf is a legitimate approach. Again, especially late 80s with a graphic novel vibe. Stepping away from the hairy beastie, the canine-esque. Werewolf of American Werewolf in London and all those movies, and having that slightly more sort of greeny, punkified, comic strippy type of werewolf is a visual to aspire to and to attempt, and absolutely, I don't think it quite works. 4 vision mixers, my goodness, it's because they were having to do lots of juggling, but the lighting is excellent. But Denise Barron does the makeup, who done the Jocondans, didn't she, in Twin Dilemma? I don't, and I don't like the angle of the Doctor's face, particularly on the final close up as well. It's not my favourite cliffhanger, if I'm honest with you. But that's nitpicking. I think, as I say, it's a compromise, because actually the lighting effect is very good. The music is excellent. The way that T.P. McKenna sort of gives the tips the nod to the ringmaster, and he initiates the lighting, and the fact that they call it the old devil moon, all of that really works. I love all of that. Mark Ayres' music is very good. The lighting is very nice in that scene. But I remember being quite embarrassed by that werewolf. I'm not so embarrassed about it now, and I think the ambition behind the visual is a good call. I just don't think it's pulled off as well as some of the other elements of the story. And we now go into episode 4, which has many elements of damp squibbishness for me. So it may be that, much like in The Greatest Show in the Galaxy, when I end up looking back, I look back to the glory days of episodes 1, 2, and 3, from the disappointment of part 4, where I wonder what happened to the past and where all my optimism, has been killed off by the voracious appetite of the conclusion. But it may be that I will reassess it, because that happens a lot in this process. But even with the fact that I've always found part 4 a little disappointing, even though it has loads of great bits in it, it still doesn't spoil the story for me. I think it stops the story being, in my top 20, maybe top 30, but it doesn't stop it being a story that exists very much on the upper end of my sort of scoring, if you like, bearing in mind it's from an era that I did struggle with as a youngster. More my fault than its, for sure. I still loved this. And bearing in mind, my taste is generally more towards sort of, Philip Hinchcliffe-y, gothic-y, horror-y stuff. Those are more my kinds of stories. I do embrace and I do enjoy the fact that Doctor Who of this era dares to be different, and I found myself very sympathetic to the Paradise Towerses and the Greatest Shows in a way that I know a lot of my fellow fans weren't. That said, I hated the Happiness Patrol at the time, and I love it now. So that's it. But I've always enjoyed Greatest Show, despite the bits that I might sort of highlight and go, I found they didn't work, or found those elements disappointing, or that direction the story went in tricky. My general feeling has always been strong on this one, and it's never gone down, in my opinion. And as I say, I find that the further I get separated from the immediacy of the story having to be the standard bearer for Doctor Who as it exists now, and as I care less what some imagined passing viewer might think as they wander in and watch it. The only one in this house would be Shirley. We've been together 10 years. I don't think she's watched a whole classic Doctor Who story, and she does it the way that old telly is made does not translate to her. And I've had other partners for whom that's been a hurdle that they've easily got over, even though they've been perhaps less interested in telly even than Shez, whose business it is. But old telly does not do it for her. She cannot get past the stuff that to me doesn't look odd. But I can understand to somebody, and she's the same age as I am, but I can understand one of my kids who's half my age looking at it and going, well, we don't, that doesn't look like television as I know it. And I could certainly understand people brought up on New Who for whom this might look, as alien as a silent movie did to me in 1988. But also I know that there are youngsters who, and people brought up on the new show who love the old stuff. It's all about how far you're inclined to meet something, and that's not a value judgment. There's no reason why anybody should have to meet something on its own terms if it's told in a language that they're not fluent in, or that they used to know, because as I say, Shez is my age, but has forgotten to speak now, and it's too difficult to translate. So there's no mythical casual viewer. Also, I have no desire to try and convert anybody to the Doctor Who cause in the way that once I did. I am perfectly happy to enjoy Doctor Who in my own terms, and I know now, and that's social media as well, isn't it? I've just been listening to Joe Ford and a group of other articulate and intelligent and fun fans talking about a whole season of Doctor Who, so I can eavesdrop in on that conversation in a podcast, so I don't need to be seeking out people, even to have a direct conversation with them if I want to hear opinions of Doctor Who. And of course, if I hear opinions of Doctor Who that I don't agree with, I don't feel the need to challenge those, because it doesn't matter. I don't care. Now, if somebody gives me a reason to reassess a story because they've articulated it in a way I've not thought of, I do find that interesting. In fact, in the podcast I was listening to today, somebody took apart a story I like for reasons they articulated really, really well, and I absolutely thought were a really good argument. And if that story had not been to my taste, I would have used all of those reasons to say why it wasn't a good story. Happens that it's a story I really enjoy, so I can intellectually take on board all of those criticisms and then totally non-intellectually go, yeah, but I know what I like. And I like that story. But that will be a story I will talk about in my own podcast when somebody has recorded their Happy Times and Places for it, which they haven't yet. But Connor J Adkins has recorded opinions on Greatest Show in the Galaxy, including an opinion on episode 3. And I have to see if Connor is going to give the same favourite thing about episode 3 as mine. But I haven't chosen that yet, have I? I've already chosen director Alan Waring, and Connor chose the setup of the story. You know, that's the psychic circus, all of that, for episode 1. Connor and I both chose Ian Reddington's Chief Clown for episode 2. What will we choose for episode 3? Well, I mean, I do slightly admire the chutzpah of putting a Doctor Who fan in there, making him a bit of a Burke, and then killing him. I wasn't that bothered either way by WizKid at the time, because I don't think it's a bad performance. I don't think it's an embarrassing character. You can see what they're trying to do. It's actually not a bad spoof of a Doctor Who fan. And again, if you, I can kind of understand why the production team might want to do that. I adore the lighting in that caravan. I didn't mention it at the time because I was banging on about something else, but the Venetian blind sort of lighting on Ace when she's sitting on the side talking, and there's a bright light coming into that gloom, and it's quite murky in there, it's quite cobwebby. It's the inside of a caravan, that can look really shabby. And some of the shabbiness in the story is deliberate as well, because the circus, for all their golden memories of it, is an itinerant and slightly old thing that would up sticks and move, and so it's not going to be solid and smart, and it's going to be quite temporary and jerry built and shoddy, but behind the scenes. So some of that shoddiness is deliberate and speaks to what the circus and nostalgia and everything else represents. Sometimes an idealization of things that were not perhaps as amazing as we thought they were, but also that it provides an interesting backdrop as well to all the razzmatazz. Having the you peel away the veneer, there's not only menace, there's also tat, and Doctor Who is all about juxtaposition. But actually, to make that caravan gloomy and spooky and cobwebby and workshoppy and I think is a beautiful visual, and it really adds atmosphere. And in fact, the lighting as a whole, two of Doctor Who stalwarts, Don Babbage and Henry Barber, isn't it? And again, particularly, and one shouldn't judge a story because of or in spite of any behind the scenes problems, because essentially they're not our problem, and the job is to put it up there, and what we see is what we consume, and certainly what the general public would have consumed. I don't give a monkeys about what the issues are, mate. You're making a television program, and it will stand and fall by what you present us. But nonetheless, knowing what we do know about the fact that the production was in real trouble, and credit to David Lasky for having the idea of erecting a tent in the BBC car park, they've made a really good job of it, and part of that is the contribution of the lighting directors. And I don't know which lighting director was responsible for which bit, because as you saw, there's a much larger crew than usual, because obviously there must have been date changes and grabbing people here, there, and everywhere, which is why you got 4 vision mixers, for goodness sake, and 2 lighting directors. But the lighting, I think, is impressive, divorced of the fact that it was a production beset with problems. But the lighting is excellent. The lighting is excellent throughout, but I think particularly that darker, moodier, spookier stuff. But I think because it sums up so much of what the story is, because it does something quite unusual, and for me at the time, who was desperate for Doctor Who to be grown up, and desperate for Doctor Who to be taken seriously, having a character initiate their own death seemed to me remarkably strong stuff for a story, full of broadly drawn character types, undergoing a talent show for a weird family in a mad circus thing with android clowns and a punky werewolf. You've got this broken man, so lovely, touchingly played by Christopher Guard, who'd I always tended to see playing sort of posh types, but Chris is actually a bit more of a hippie type. But it was unusual casting for me. He was cast against type, I thought, but actually when you talk to him, he's quite musical and he's quite let it all hang out kind of guy. He's a sensitive, sort of artistic sort of kind of chap. Chris, he's probably closer to Bellboy than to the parts that I was used to seeing him play. But I think he carries the part off really, really well. There is a brokenness about him, and as I say, what that stands for beyond him as an individual person, but as the death of hope, the death of optimism, the death of creativity, despoiled creativity. Because being creative is, it is. I'm not saying it's hard, but it does depend on people not ruining it. Do you know what I mean? And it's easy to ruin it. If you're doing a stage performance in front of 300 people, it's easily ruined by just one person shouting out, whether that's a play, a piece of stand-up. If people want to sabotage it just by going, it doesn't contribute anything. You can just ruin it. It's not the same as a heckle, You are dependent on the goodwill of an audience. You are dependent on people meeting you halfway. And that fragile trust you have between the artifice you're trying to create, the atmosphere you're trying to create, and the joy you're trying to bestow upon others, can just be willfully trodden over at any moment when you're filming something. It shocks me how often when I'm doing a piece to camera for these Doctor Who documentaries, somebody, I was doing one the other day, and two blokes at work, they're in a truck with the decal of the company they work for on it, just beeped their horn, just to ruin what I was doing. I'd never met them. We hadn't moved them out of the way. We hadn't inconvenienced them. They'd spotted me out the window, leaning up against a wall, doing this to camera. We only had a very, very brief time to do it. They didn't know that. But they didn't know us, what we were doing, anything like that. We'd done no cause to piss them off. But they thought it would be funny to do that. But all they did was spoil our thing. And I'd actually done a really good take, and it was quite complicated, but and we couldn't use it. And I had to do it again. And of course, they're perfectly entitled to do that. It's not the end of the world. But the only thing they did there was a malignancy, was a destruction of something, of somebody that, now again, if we'd sort of said, look, move out of the way, we're filming, we're television, don't you know we are? We hadn't done any of that. We were minding our own business, trying to do a thing. But because it's a television thing, because it's a creative thing, people think, oh, and I can ruin that. And then on the same shoot, I'm doing a bit where I'm walking towards that, and a guy, 3 builders, and one of them walks very close, and and they go, and you know what they're doing, and you could stop and go, oh guys, don't be arsehole, and then they'll be, yeah, what's your problem? And you just have to do it, and they think they've been really clever, and they think they've been really funny, and it happened on pretty much on the next documentary that's coming out as I record this. Pretty much every one of my to-camera pieces was sort of sabotaged by somebody, because it's easy to break that. And people think, oh, it's nothing. And I suppose, in the great scheme of things, it is nothing. But it's still a horrible thing to do to somebody that's done you no harm, that's just trying to make a thing, And I wouldn't do that to somebody else who was trying to do their job. If they were building a wall, well, would I go and knock it over for no other reason than, well, yeah, you're wall building ponce. Do you know what I mean? It wouldn't occur to me to want to spoil something somebody else was doing. But because it is a creative thing, there's an assumption that the people doing it are full of themselves. I think that's part of it. And there's a joy in sort of bringing that to heel or whatever. We're not just trying to make a thing. And actually, sometimes under really difficult, tight circumstances, and for no money. Anyway, the reason I mention that, just that they've all come into my head, and I obviously needed to expunge them because I can't be irritated on the day, because that would give them what they want, and also it would affect the work and blah 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 blah. But it is a bit. It does baffle me. It does upset me, actually, that somebody's idea of a good time is to ruin what somebody else is doing. But in terms of creativity, and as I say, this happens in stand-up all the time. You can easily sabotage a stand-up gig, and I've seen people do it with no wit. I'm not talking about a heckle. Heckles can be quite funny. They can generate their own comedy material, but you can ruin a comedy night just by talking, but just by not joining in, by blocking, or an ill-natured heckle. There's one, a heckle that sort of says, "Well, what are your trousers, mate?" or something. That at least gives you something to hold on to. But just "oh shit," or something unpleasant and unkind, it just sort of brings the night down, and you have to fight fire with fire then. And sometimes you can win that, but sometimes it just makes it horrible. And I think there's an element of that with what the psychic circus represents. Is it represents people trying to make a nice thing. At the end of the day, even if they are stupid hippies or whatever, or idealists or whatever, that it's about people trying to make a nice thing, and greed and unkindness and a lack of imagination and a thirst for power and all of that, spoiling that and ruining that and destroying creativity. And that speaks to me, and I think that the story is trying to look at aspects of that, and the idea that, and then you have as we will discover, the gods, and that, being forced to entertain, and if not, consigned to the chasm of oblivion, which is a metaphor for what's kind of happening with Doctor Who at the time. So I'm appreciative of that. I think all of that is very interesting, and yet they manage, if it is a metaphor for Doctor Who, if it is mirroring, Philistinism versus creativity, the pressure that creatives are put under, the pressure that Doctor Who is, the scrutiny, the unkind scrutiny, the lack of faith, forcing it to sort of, is what we say as comedians sometimes when the audience are sort of saying to us, dance monkey boy kind of thing, is a sort of saying, you're the dancing monkey for the audience. If you're the comedian on the show, that's all you are. If we want to bring ourselves down to earth and take the mickey out of ourselves. Even if that is the case, and it's not an illegitimate thing for the Doctor Who team to be looking at, so long as they're putting it into an interesting story, and obviously I think they are. If it is that metaphor, and if it is mirroring what's going on with the show and its relationship with the BBC and its relationship with the viewers and its relationship with the tabloid press, within that metaphor and within that story is this moment of a broken man, a broken creative man who had hopes and dreams that have been destroyed, and his final moment of defiance. It's an empty gesture, as I say. All he does is buy Ace of the Doctor seconds, really. He doesn't hold anybody up, hardly at all. It's more of a symbolic act of defiance, which is quite a lot to lose your life for, or quite a little, actually, to lose your life for. It's not much to throw away your life for, except for what it represents. But then again, I don't want my life to be an abstract representation of defiance. Do you know what I mean? I want my death to have slightly more meaning than that, if I'm going to go that way. But for Doctor Who, it's such a strong thing because it's a suicide, or self-inflicted death. It's a triumph for Bellboy in a perverse and weird way. It's expertly staged. The way that the camera is timed, that you just see the hands going around his throat, that he's in the background with that excellent way that Alan Waring frames things. And then it takes us to the greatest asset of the story, which is Ian Reddington and the clown and what he's doing. I think it's and it's got that lighting in that scene as well. So I think that scene, because it encapsulates that metaphor, it encapsulates that character. It is staged in and of itself absolutely perfectly. It's also got that lighting that I really love because it happens to take place in the place that is so beautifully lit. I'm going to choose the death of Bellboy and the scene where Bellboy dies as my favourite bit of The Greatest Show in the Galaxy, Episode 3. So, what is Connor's favourite thing about Episode 3? Will it be, as mine was, the death of Bellboy, which would make me 2-1 up? Or will it be something else which will mean that Connor, as is most likely to happen, considering he could choose literally anything, which would mean I lose the advantage I gained from choosing the Chief Clown last time. Let's see what Connor likes about Episode 3.
So, the end of Episode 3 of Greatest Show in the Galaxy. My favourite part about that episode is the scene between WizKid and Captain Cook. So in the first scene, you obviously see WizKid go up to Captain Cook, and Cook snaps on him immediately. And then in the next scene, they're seen having a friendly chat with one another, and then all of a sudden, the captain tricks WizKid into taking his place, into going out into the psychic circus to perform his act. And in the blink of an eye, he's dead not long after. And it is honestly the personification of a fan that should never meet their heroes. It's a bit odd in my case, though, because I've met a few people from Doctor Who, so who knows? Maybe that was just a rare exception.
Yes, it is. It is very true that actually. Yes, don't meet your heroes because in this case they'll encourage you to take their place and have you killed. And I've met a fair few of my heroes, and it's always been an amazing experience. Actually, I've been very lucky. I think we're very lucky with the Doctor Who people, and I've been very lucky with the way that I have encountered pretty much all the people I've encountered. I reject the idea that you should never meet your heroes. I love my heroes, and we all need heroes. And I think having somebody to look up to, or somebody to be excited to meet, or somebody to be jelly-legged in the presence of, keeps one humble and keeps one respectful. And I don't think those are bad attributes to have. And it actually doesn't matter whether your hero is because nobody is perfect, and that's why they say never meet your heroes, because actually you realize your heroes are just people like everybody else, and that's the disappointment. You're disappointed that people are people, but actually that's not the point, because it doesn't matter what your hero is like. It's what your hero means to you and the feeling that they put into you, that you could be so excited in the first place to meet what is actually just a person. It's not about the person. It's about, the nature that how heroes inspire you. It's not about the harsh reality of what they are. And I think actually we're too quick today to go, well, it turns out that person's just a person. Well, yes, that's not the point. Of course they're just a person. Of course a big Hollywood star is going to be somebody who's got their own, little trivialities and pointlessnesses and all sorts of other things. That's not some major revelation. That's not some sign that Hollywood is, full of, cancerousness. That's because people are just people. The whole thing about heroes is not what they actually are. It's about what their status to us brings out in us. That's enthusiasm and excitement, and as I say, humility and respect. And I think those are good traits to have. And I think when we lose our own humility and we lose respect for things, even if they're things we shouldn't respect, it doesn't matter. It's the act of being respectful and not getting carried away with oneself that I think keeps us, keeps us and our foibles in check. But in terms of the Doctor Who thing of meeting your heroes like WizKid did, I very much like meeting mine, and I never thought that I would, be on first name terms with somebody from Doctor Who, let alone that I could, as I'm about to now, let alone that I could time travel, because I'm going to have to do that for the purposes of this, into the future to speak to somebody that I'm in regular touch with, who is Andrew Cartmel, who is one of the names I read out on the credits as I read the credits out loud, which is a thing I did for fun, and I don't care who knows it. I would, and I'd make up my, as I mentioned last week in the closing credits, I would make up my own order depending on who I thought deserved top billing, and I also credited T.P. McKenna as Captain Cook rather than the Captain. I made that executive decision that I made that change. I thought that's how he should have been credited. And yes, Andrew Cartmel's name is on the credits as script editor. Very, very important role. He was a key figure. He always seemed, like he was somebody with his finger on the pulse of taking Doctor Who into the directions it should be going, even if I was didn't quite enjoy the vibe of the direction that the show was going in some ways. Andrew always seemed to escape my opprobrium. I was cross with John Nathan Turner, and of course, as time has gone by, I've this period I've come to know as actually what it is, which is a brave and forward-thinking and ambitious and imaginative, and really valid and vibrant attempt to do something interesting with a show that was not well loved in any quarter, and that was the responsibility of one of those people making that show, who by their nature to me were heroes. That is the script editor of Doctor Who, Andrew Cartmel, who is now on this podcast. And I wouldn't have dreamed of that, because in those days I didn't know what a podcast was, but I certainly wouldn't have dreamed that anybody would want to be listening to me wittering on about Doctor Who. I think they would want to be listening to Andrew Cartmel talking about Doctor Who, and what a joy that he's going to do on this podcast. And let's see if he's gone with Connor's joy, which is WizKid and Captain Cook, mine, which is the suicide of Bellboy, or Andrew's very own favourite thing about episode 3. So come join me in the future. And episode 3. So now this was where I started to really struggle, because I knew I was.
Can I tell you my favourite thing? Which is
I was running out of things. Yeah, go on, hit me with your episode 3.
Oh, look, it's the transformation of Mags.
Yeah.
Because it was, just to go off again on a tangent, I think that Survival, another story, was one of the greatest stories we ever did, and was terribly handicapped by the design of the cheetah people, who looked cuddly and lovely and gorgeous, because they were these full body costumes. And I always thought the cheetah people should be fangs, contact lenses, and talons on the fingers, and they could have been fantastic and basically humanoid with a minimum of makeup. Well, that's what they did with Mags, and you could see, and it scared the dickens out of everybody watching it. I just thought that was so good, and that was what the cheetah people should have been like. But I'm not taking it away from the Greatest Show. That's one of the assets of Greatest Show. One of the greatest, scariest monster sequences and transformations that we've ever seen in the show. And isn't it prefaced by the magnificent T.P. McKenna saying something like, "That old devil moon."
Yeah.
And of course, it's Jessica Martin. I keep talking about Mags, but Jessica Martin was brilliant. But we were so well served by the effects and costume and the lighting and everything. And of course, Alan Waring, who is the man who was making sure that this happened at such a high level.
It's funny, because as a geeky kid who never felt cool, Mags, the fact that the werewolf was kind of punky and sort of sexy and straight, felt to me, I didn't know graphic novels particularly, but felt to me like something out of the graphic novels that I wish I was old enough to, or cool enough to be sort of in on. That I knew sort of people who were older and cooler. So it seemed to me to be deferring greatness upon Doctor Who. It was being influenced by the stuff the cool kids liked, and that were coming into Doctor Who felt really fresh to me at the time.
I think, full disclosure, I think Stephen Wyatt's memory of this will be the same as mine. I asked if we could have a punk werewolf in it, because it was, graphic novels is a good thing to mention, because I'd been reading, of course, the graphic novels of Alan Moore. And I don't think Alan Moore ever had a punk werewolf, but it was the kind of thing that you could easily find in his work. And I just thought it was a great idea. And it didn't, I don't think that concept turned Stephen on particularly. He went ahead and wrote Mags and TP, the Captain Cook,
Yeah,
is he?
Captain Cook. Yeah.
In his own way, but the design came through doing her like a punk, and that's what you responded to. So I'm really glad that
Mm.
that landed.
Yeah. Well, although interestingly, neither Connor or I chose that. As I say, we were kind of. I was certainly thinking I've only got three things left, and I'd like to choose a number. So I went all around the houses for episode 3. Connor chose something I also didn't go near, but that is definitely worth talking about. Connor chose the scenes between WizKid and Captain Cook, which for him, he said, personified the idea that you should never meet your heroes. Because WizKid is a fan of Captain Cook, and
Yeah.
that aficionado-dom as it leads to his own demise. Uh,
Well, the Whiz Kid was deliberately written because uh, at this point in our work on Doctor Who, we'd all been exposed to fandom, which can be a lovely thing, but sometimes it can be a trying thing, especially for somebody like John, who lived and breathed Doctor Who for, I guess, decades. Uh, so Stephen had seen enough of what we might call the sometimes excessive side of fandom to create a character who was a full-on kind of nutcase type fan and to satirize him. And I must say that in the table reads, everybody just broke into laughter because they recognized the stereotype, the trope that he was going for, and found it extremely funny. So yeah, and I think Stephen certainly nailed that. I think some of the fans might have been a little disenchanted with that, but we're not attacking fans per se. In my time on Doctor, which does definitely span decades, I think I've had 2 or at most 3 bad experiences with fans, but they do tend to stick with you.
I suppose the argument is if you feel offended by WizKid, then you're the one who's the problem because he's only satirizing a certain kind of. But I have
Yeah,
to say,
I think I hope that that's what comes across because
I,
yeah,
it's the line. I never got to see the early days, but I know it's not as good as it used to be. I'm afraid I felt very seen then.
it's a killer line and it's so great and speaks to Stephen's brilliance as a writer.
Yes, and actually, I wanted to nod because he's we've gone past talking about him, but he nearly got my vote for part 1 of these supporting characters. I loved having Danny Peacock in as Nord, Vandal of the Road, and his line about "Do you want me to do something? I will do something audible to your ears." I think is one of the great Doctor Who lines. But I didn't choose WizKid and Captain Cook. I chose something rather grimmer. I chose a scene that I thought I could get a lot of my favorite things in at once because the music in it is great. The lighting in that particular set is fantastic, but also it does a thing that is very unusual for Doctor Who, and that is the inferred suicide of Bellboy,
Yes,
which is an
that was one of mine
extraordinary scene.
when he gets the robots to kill him. Yes, well done. Because I thought that's the one. And I thought no, Mags is even better. But yes, thank you, Toby.
I mean, would that I remember as a kid watching that thinking this is stern stuff for
It's
Doctor
very
Who.
dark.
Did you ever have any questions that you could do something like that? Because that seems to me as far as you could go
No,
at
because
that
it's not
time.
the violence isn't visually explicit, but what is so unsettling about it is all the psychological undercurrents
Hmm.
because they're his own creations and because he's handing back his ticket because he is packing it in, he's committing suicide. But
Hmm.
that was one of the most extraordinary and brilliant scenes that Stephen wrote, and it really, the fact that it was on my shortlist, it speaks for itself. I mean, it's kind of the Frankenstein story completely compressed.
Yes. Well, so that was episode 3.
Great choice, Toby. I thank you for
Oh,
mentioning that.
thanks. Well, I just think it has the direction, it has the music, it has the lighting, it has Christopher Guard's brilliant. But then the whole thing,
Yeah,
and as a kid, it made me feel like, well, if my friends are watching Doctor Who now, they're going to come to school tomorrow and tell me it's the best thing ever.
I can't remember, but isn't Mark's music kind of chillingly jaunty? Macabre has a macabre kind of jollity to it.
That beautiful thing that Doctor Who is at its best when it does well is dissonance. Yes,
Yeah,
it's a perverted jauntiness that makes it
yeah,
unsettling.
exactly.
That's the
Exactly.
appeal of Doctor Who, Andrew. It's the perverted jauntiness I go for.
I'll go for that. It gets my vote.
So episode,
I'd call it macabre jollity, but I think we're talking about the same thing.
macabre jollity. Well, I think yours is probably more reasoned.
Mine's more difficult to say. Yours is better.
I
Yeah.
like macabre jollity.
Perverted jauntiness is better. Yeah.
Well, we're back in the past. So as I record this, I don't know if Andrew chose my thing, Connor's thing, or a different thing. So you know better than I where this podcast stands right now. So all I can do is go with the knowledge of I've got, which is that the end is nigh. It's even nigher than nigh. It's now, and you can join me for episode 4, which, as I say, a little spoiler alert, is an episode that I always thought was a bit of a disappointing ending to a great story. Let's see if that view of mine persists to this day, or whether the hang-ups I had about it, will actually end up buried in the sand like an inexplicable gladiator sword that seems to go out of nowhere. But anyway, we'll talk about that next week. But for now, it's nigh now to say goodbye. Goodbye. Well, thanks very much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Haydock, and my special guest this time around is Connor J Adkins, who can be found on Twitter at Connor NJ Adkins. And I'm grateful too to the script editor of Doctor Who from this period, Andrew Cartmel. As well as Andrew, I'm grateful to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Ian Moore, Brandon Moore, Jim Mooney, Justin E. Monaghan, John Molyneux, Phil Mitchell, James Miller, Nick Mellish, Steve Manfred, Gen McLeod, Joe McLachlan, Philip Marsh, Man in a Skirt Alert, Kazin, Jacob Lumley, Paul Loveday, Andrew Llewellyn, Andrew Lester, Mark Leadsom, Neil Little, Paul Lindblad, and Jonathan Letarget. The music is by Dave Gates and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. If you would like your name read out on the credits, well, that is one of the joys of being a patron. You can go to patreon.com/Toby Haydock, where for as little as £3 a month, you can get advance releases, you get monthly AMAs, you get your own special podcast called Far Too Much Information, although there have been far too few of those recently. That's bad advertising, Toby. I'm in the process of getting them sorted, but don't use their absence as a reason not to get people to be a patron when the whole point of this part of the show is to try and accrue patrons. Oh, well, there we go. I'm honest. I have to say, I have many shortcomings, but I like to think my honesty is not one of them, even though under this particular circumstance it is. Anyway, as well as Far Too Much Information, which is the podcast that is just for you, there are also other exclusives behind the scenes from the various DVD documentaries and commentaries and things that I do, and other bits of exclusives, and certainly advance releases of all of the podcasts that I do. So that's at Patreon. You also get 10% off if you join up for a year in one go, and it's a kind of nice place to hang about. If you don't want to do that or don't want the monthly commitment, you can go to kofi.com/Toby Haydock, where every now and again you can throw a few quid at me if you've particularly liked to release, or if I sound particularly hungry or desperate, or hey, you're feeling particularly flush. However, I know that times are increasingly tough for everybody, and this sort of stuff is free at the point of contact, and that's great because that's the nature of the landscape out there right now, and it means that we can chuck our stuff out there and get listeners without having to avail ourselves of the gatekeepers who used to be in charge of the dissemination of stuff. So I get it, and I'm on board, and I certainly don't expect you to be feel in any way obliged to be financially supportive of these things, because so much out of there is available free. I listen to loads of podcasts that I don't pay for that I really, really enjoy. And if you're in that position with these, well, you listening is the main thing, and I am grateful because there's a lot of great stuff out there. There's a lot of great Doctor Who stuff out there. However, what does cost you nothing, apart from a little bit of your time, for which I'd be grateful, is if you go to iTunes, Spotify, Patreon, all those places, and give these a few lines of positive review saying what you like about them, and those precious and much needed 5 stars, which really help to separate these from everybody else, or just enable them to get their head above the parapet and be seen by people who may not have availed themselves of the opportunities to have a listen. And the more people listen, well, the more it's worth me sitting up at currently 1 o'clock in the morning in order to record these sorts of things. So all help in that regard, much appreciated. I'm all over social media, at Toby Haydoke and at Haydoke Podcasts on Twitter. I've got a Facebook page as well, and also I'm on Instagram at toby.haydoke. So please follow me in all those places. Thank you so much. I'm not going to do a long coda just because, well, the greatest show in the galaxy, as it turns out, because I've recorded it all now, but I just do these bits at the very end when I'm putting them together. You know, these are post sort of edit, as it were. The next episode is quite long. I noticed, and as will become part of the point of discussion in next week's episode, that this, which I'd always remembered was on the 28th. Why did I remember this was on the 28th? It's my brother's wedding anniversary, the 28th. It's also the birthday of Bernard Padden, who plays Tylos in Full Circle. Or is he New Year's Eve? There's certainly quite a lot that happens around the 28th. Another friend of mine got married on the 28th as well. Lots of things seem to happen on the 28th. It's people who want to be sort of caught in the afterglow of Christmas. I don't know. But I think this was on the 28th of December, this episode. And I remember being, primed to record it and it being on, what I think it's Margaret Cabourn-Smith describes it as the Merineum, which is the gap between Christmas and New Year. That's a beautiful bit of comedy writing, for which I take no credit, as I say. I think that's ascribed to the genius of Margaret Cabourn-Smith. And I heard it I think I might have heard it via the Wheezing Groaning Sound, which is an excellent Doctor Who podcast, but that's much filthier than this and full of loads of factual errors, but they don't aspire not to make any, and they're great boys. Paul, Tom and John, all excellent Doctor Who podcasters, much naughtier than I am, and also totally wrong on the greatest show in the galaxy, by the way, which they hated. Let's not get into that. I said this was going to be short. It's not going to be, is it? It already isn't short. Now I'm making it longer by explaining how not short it is. Anyway, listen up. This, the 28th of December, 1988, means that this is the last episode of Doctor Who, everybody, that was broadcast when I was 14. Because between now, episode 3, and next week, episode 4, I turned 15. God. I will dwell on the passage of time in the next episode of Happy Times and Places. So the lesson, before we even get to it, is not to wish away the days between the release of this and the next episode, but drink in every precious moment of life, because before you know it, it'll be 35 years later, and you'll be realising how much of it you've wasted. Oh, I swore then. I don't normally swear. I think it would sound, but I'm gonna leave that in just to offend the people that have stayed to the end. I mean, people swear in podcasts all the time. I don't think you should swear on a Doctor Who podcast, myself. But I've been a bit lax lately because I've heard all sorts of C's and F's on quite a few Doctor Who related podcasts recently. So let's have this one. Let's have let's have that as the lasting legacy of Greatest Show in the Galaxy, episode 3. It's the only podcast of mine on Doctor Who that has the F word in it, but only if you stayed right to the end. You see, if you persevere long enough, you get a good. As you'll notice, I did bleep it out in the end. I just couldn't bring myself to have an F swear in a Doctor Who podcast done by me. Even though I think it would have been funnier with the F. I still have effing standards.